We will always write our love letters to her, always sing and paint and sew and cook her favorite foods, and think and fight and cry and plant and harvest and celebrate for her, our Palestine. This was an excerpt of the poem We Never Left, written by someone who certainly writes and fights for Palestine, and we are honored to have her with us today, Suzanne Abulhawa. Welcome to the first episode of Tarwida, a series of conversations that bring Palestinian arts, culture, and heritage to the forefront. We hear from creatives and creators about their very own Palestine. In a nutshell, if you want to know more about creative Palestine, this is the place to be. Susan Abulhawa is a novelist, poet, essayist, scientist, mother, and activist. Her debut novel, Mornings in Jenin, was an international bestseller, and her latest novel, Against the Loveless World, has garnered much acclaim. Abulhawa is also the founder of Playgrounds for Palestine, a children's organization dedicated to uplifting Palestinian children. This episode was recorded on the 27th of August, 2024. Ahla wa sahla fiki, Suzanne. It's really good to have you with us today.
Ahlan fiki. Thanks for having me.
So, we begin with what's at the forefront of all our minds, what's been at the forefront of all our minds for the past year, Gaza and the genocide. You went there recently, twice actually, and your voice has been crucial in conveying the reality. Can you tell us how you made this decision to go? What were you hoping to achieve?
To be honest, I had an impulse to just be there, and it's not the first time. In 2002, when there were reports of a massacre in Jenin, I likewise, had that same impulse to be on the ground physically, to do what I can, whatever I can, to help. I do think, there's this idea that writers should be separate somehow, that our job is not on the ground. Our job is to write. And of course, that's part of it, but I wholeheartedly disagree. I think the writer has a role and a responsibility to be in the street, to know what it is that I'm actually talking about, and to know what it is that I'm writing about.
And that's something that we do want to talk to you about, which is, the thin line between activism and art, and when do you wear the hat of an activist and when do you wear the hat of an artist? Can you wear both at once at the same time, or do you have to choose?
I don't think there's a line, thin or otherwise. It's kind of like saying, is there a line between being a woman and being a mother, for example?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're inextricable from each other.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure that they're different parts, to be honest, because they inform, every part of oneself informs the other. It's part of the same organism. It's part of the same emotional and intellectual body that is, one's creative impulse is also tied to my political impulse, is tied to my human impulse. It's tied to empathy. It's tied to imagination and creativity and reality. All of this is the soup from which I live my life, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. When the genocide began, some artists that I spoke to said that they froze. I mean, creatively, there was a freezing that happened where they couldn't produce anything. And I've heard people say that you need, as a creative, just the right amount of tension. Too little, and you can't produce anything, and too much, you freeze. So where do you see yourself? In which group? The people who have been able to produce creatively, or do you feel like there's a buffer, like you need some time before you can?
So prior to the commencement of this acute phase of the genocide, I had been working on a novel and it was 2/3 done. And I put it aside for about a year while I was organizing the Palestine Rights Literature Festival, which took place incidentally just 2 weeks before October 7th. So my plan was to pick it up after the festival. So I'm probably in the group of the Frozen group. I've gone back to it and I did work on it some more after I got back from Gaza. It's not so much that I'm creatively frozen, it's that I feel like there's more important things to tend to.
Mm.
I believe in taking practical measures as well. I started a children's charity about 24 years ago, and it was mostly focused on recreation, but we have decided to focus all of our efforts and our funds on a school that we just established in Deir al-Balah. So I am also focused on that and sort of, just checking in on that from afar. We have a brilliant staff that are helping as many children as we can. It's 120 at the moment. So there's all of these moving parts that I'm always dealing with. Um, fundraising, trying to figure out how to keep the school going, thinking about the next Palestine rights. We're being sued by Zionists for the last Palestine. Yeah, it's just, they're always after us in one way or another. None of that is conducive to the creative process, I suppose. But I'm kind of now, actually in the past couple of weeks, I've just told myself, like, you have to do this. And so for the past couple of days, at least, I have been working on it. That's a really long answer.
Nice.
But the truth is I'm somewhere in between, mostly I'm frozen creatively, but yeah.
And so you have been doing a lot. You have a growing audience and, in a way, a growing responsibility as a pivotal voice of information and insight. You're writing articles, you're posting, you're doing interviews. There's so much consumption of social media right now, but it's so pivotal. It's helping people understand, and it's opening up, people's eyes. When someone visits your profile right now, if they don't know you, they maybe wouldn't know even that you're a writer. Tell us about social media, the importance of it, and how you've, your experience in, promoting what you believe in.
So I, like a lot of Palestinians, I've been targeted. I'm permanently banned from Twitter. And a lot of the posts that I put on Instagram, where I'm most active now, are endlessly removed. But nonetheless, we continue to post. So a lot of my followers on Instagram have followed me from my books, and I've discovered that a lot of these folks don't have access to the news and the things that I see on a daily basis, and sort of take for granted that everybody's seeing them. So when I post them, I get a lot of, if you look at some of the comments, some people are shocked. Social media is obviously a powerful tool for us, which is why it's so heavily censored at the moment. So there's a massive war against information, and I think that's one of the pillars of colonialism. It's one of the pillars of imperialism is to control the information that people are allowed to consume.
So if we were to just go back to the topic of Gaza, when you went there, obviously genocide happens on many levels, and a big one is the cultural one that's happening. Destruction of so many historical and cultural centers, including libraries, archives, as well as the killing of many artists and writers, intellectuals like Rifat al-Arir, who resisted the occupation through their art. Can you tell us about why does Israel do this?
It's not just Israel. Every colonial power, every imperial power has always targeted the writers and the artists and the thinkers. Israel, and Israel's no exception in that. You always go after the thinkers, the people who can inspire others. the people who can teach others. They are going after the healers, Palestine's, Gaza's doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals. They're targeting them. They are targeting the journalists who disseminate the news. They have targeted and eliminated all the people that they know who can rebuild the society.
Looking at this destruction, which, you can't help but feel, how can we even recover from this? But, there's a long history of artists who've been targeted, like Hassan Kanafani, Naji Ali, and yet they live on. Their words live on. What do you think will be the effect of the destruction on Gaza's arts and culture? A lot was physically lost, but what will happen to the actual, culture?
Well, in short, it will live on.
Yeah.
I just wrote a foreword to a book for Rifat al-Arir, and in the closing line, I quoted what a lot of activists said after the indigenous activist Berta Caceres was killed. Se no murió, se multiplicó, which meant she didn't die, she multiplied. And I related that to Rifat. He did not die, he multiplied. And all of his students, in his poetry, in the endless recitations of that now famous poem, If I Must Die, there's a center that's being named after Rifat, and there will be more centers. There will be fellowships named after Rifat.
That's really beautiful.
And I, also, and this is something Israelis don't understand. Like, we are so deeply rooted in the land. This will not erase us. Our leaves and our trunks will grow back because our roots are really deep in the land. I think at the heart of what Israel is doing is a visceral and profound jealousy of what they desperately want, but can never have. And that is our story. They want our roots. They want the culture that comes from continuous habitation of the land for millennia. They want our culinary heritage. They want to be us. And the only way that can happen is to eliminate us, because we are the living proof that they have no relevance to the land. We are the obstacle to this fantasy that they want so desperately. Yeah. Afaf, I'm sorry, it looks like I made you cry. I apologize.
First of all, you have such a soothing voice. I feel like it's like a talking meditation. I'm like in a trance, but also I'm incredibly obviously for obvious reasons, very emotional. It's been,
Yeah.
I don't even have to explain. So.
We're all living it. We're all living it, and we're all connected. I feel like, yeah, it's running threads through all of our hearts.
Yeah. And speaking of threads, I wanted to talk to you about when you write about painful historic moments, like, for example, Mornings in Jenin, when the family is expelled from their village in 48, or when the young girls are hiding in the camp during the 67 war. These are very graphic scenes, and they're very difficult for us as readers to process, especially now after the images we've seen coming out of Gaza. How do you feel while you're writing them? Like, what does anything happen to you? Is it difficult to write as it is to read, for us to read?
Sometimes, yeah. And actually, this circles back to your first question. I was thinking about, what's making me be stuck on this in this one spot in the book, and it happens to be the expulsion from it all takes place in the village of Safsaf in northern Palestine. And I think that's it, writing it right now has been really difficult. There are some parts that just come out and never get rewritten, and it's always in these intensely emotional parts. And I will sometimes cry when I'm writing, but then when I go back, it's a more mechanical process of, rewriting and trying to find the right words and
Right.
and trying to not overdo it. So there is a mechanical part of it too, that steps away from the emotion. But inevitably, I do cry. For example, the scene with Fatima in Sabra and Shatila. I actually bawled. I was
Mm.
crying like
Mm.
quite heavily during that process, but I was happily crying because I felt like that if I'm affected, then I'm
Yeah.
doing it right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to ask you, when you went to Jenin following the massacre in 2002, did you know that you were going to end up writing a book?
Oh, absolutely not. No. I went to medical school. I was a scientist and I worked for a drug company as a researcher. Um, I don't come from an educated family and I barely had books growing up. The idea of being a writer was completely um, alien to me. It was just far removed from my reality. It's almost like, aspiring to be the Queen of England, right? It was just being a writer was something you were born into. And that's not something that I can be, that I can do. I had started writing by then, but it was mostly letters to the editor and newspaper op-eds. I was actually quite shocked at the time that people were asking me to submit more stuff. And a lot of people were responding to the things I wrote. And then I dared to apply for a writing grant, and it was pretty competitive. And I ended up walking away with the top prize, it had like a $25,000 award with it, which was perfect because my job ended up firing me. It was a long story, and it had a lot to do with the things I was writing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and so I was a single mom. I didn't have any money. I don't have family in this country. I had, I wasn't making much money, and it was kind of, at the end of the month, my check was gone. But I cried that whole day. And then the next day, I just started writing about Jenin because I had just been there a couple of months ago. And at first I didn't know what I was writing. I was writing op-eds or whatever, but I just kept writing. And at some point it occurred to me that I was writing a novel, and it was the strangest thing, really. I don't know what made me think I could write a novel. Hanan Ashrawi had once sent me, I loved her and I looked up to her, and she was this amazing, powerful, articulate woman. And she had read something I had written, and she wrote me this lovely note saying, this is a really powerful piece. Have you ever thought about writing a narrative? And, I think that was in the back of my mind. And I took it to heart, like, wow, Hanan Ashrawi thinks I could write something. um, yeah. So, this is an example of be careful what you say to people, if you have something negative to say. And
Yeah.
don't ever hold back on saying something kind to somebody because you don't know what it's going to
Yeah.
do to their psyche, because it certainly was one of the things that propelled me to dare think I could write something. And so it was just, that was it. And of course, I can always look back now and say, wow, I was always a writer. And, when I was a child in Kuwait, I used to write Arabic poetry. And this is a funny story. My uncle Jamal. So I wrote this. I had a crush on our Iraqi neighbor. I was like 6 years old or something, and I wrote him a love letter, right? And I hid it. It was like my secret stash. But my uncle Jamal found it, and I was horrified. Of course, they were like laughing, at me. Oh, Susie's in love, whatever. But he took my letter and he modified it and gave it to his girlfriend. So it was apparently well written.
Oh my God. That's amazing. You were like a ghost writer without knowing it. Oh, that's funny. But can you still write in Arabic, like if you wanted to? Because that was many years ago.
I'm literate. I still read and write in Arabic, but because I left at such a young age, I left Arabic. My formal schooling ended when I was 13. So the language got arrested, and it's one of my biggest, wounds, I guess, in life, that Arabic was sort of stolen from my tongue in some ways. It's not sophisticated enough for me to write literature in Arabic. I wish sometimes I fantasize about enrolling in school in Arabic literature and just trying, and then I think, God, I'm like in my 50s, I'm way too old.
I'm sure you would be able to do it. So I wanted to ask you, just to go back to Janine, at that point when you started writing the book, did you then do more interviews? Like, did you go back, or did you rely on what you had heard already? Like, just we're looking now at the balance between literature and then, like, historical accuracy. So what was your process?
So when I started writing Mornings in Janine, as with all of my books, I don't really know what's going to happen or what the story is. It starts with a couple of seeds. And with Mornings in Janine, I knew that that was going to be one of the locations. And at some point in the story, that massacre would take place that I had witnessed, at least in the aftermath. And I also knew I'd always been fascinated by Kanafani's story, Return to Haifa, which I'd heard as a child. And I always thought it was a true story. I didn't know it was a novella. It was a story that it was just one of the stories that stuck with me, that this Israeli family would take a Palestinian child and raise them as their own. So that was sort of always in the back of my mind. And I wanted that element in the story. So those were the only two things I knew about the story when I started working on it. But with all of my novels, I actually do a tremendous amount of research. Like, I'm always reading. I just read a massive amount of books relating to our region, including, like, right now, I don't know what made me do this. I'm reading a biography of Chaim Weizmann. So I have a pretty heavy or foundation of historic knowledge of Palestine, but I still do research as I go along, depending on where I am. And one of the things I really researched intensely for Mornings in Janine had to do with I recall like the art or the skills of planting and harvesting olives. At one point, I knew everything there was to know about all different kinds of olives. The little white fly that's like one of it's the biggest enemy of the olive. Of how much the way that shepherds would graze their animals in those fields because the nitrogen helped the olives grow. So in Mornings in Janine, I'd never been to Ein Hod, and I couldn't go. Like, it was just, I can't bear to walk through Palestinian villages or cities that are now inhabited by colonizers. But there were a couple of documentaries that were made about it. So I watched those documentaries, and there was a book on it as well. So there was that, researching the place and time and the weather and the flora and the fauna. So it's not just research of historic events and historic personalities.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because I really feel it's like as if you write with all your senses. The writing is just, it activates all the senses in a way. which is beautiful.
I want to tell you about this amazing man. His name is Abulhawa. I'm in regular contact with him now because he's one of the survivors of the Sofsaf massacre. He lives in Ain al-Hilwa now in Lebanon. And I originally had contacted his nephew, just to get more information about the village. And as I started asking him questions, his nephew realized, I don't know the answer to any of these things. And I thought that I knew everything there was to know about Sofsaf. But the kinds of questions that I was asking were things that were all sensory. And once he started relaying my questions to his uncle, the whole family now are telling me, Susie, please send us more questions. We've never heard our father be so animated telling us about these things. And it's sort of bringing him back to life. And it's it feels like such an honor and a joy for me. But yeah, I think we forget the importance of these sensory details. One of the questions, for example, was, what was your breakfast typically? And how did you cook it? Because they didn't have electricity, they didn't have stoves. And I learned a lot, right? I didn't know, they didn't eat rice. It was mostly burghul because these villages were sustaining. Another thing was that they didn't drink coffee. Did you know that? Coffee was a luxury.
No.
It was, in a lot of villages, but everybody drank shai, tea. And stuff like that. Those are things you learn. They're not written in any books. And this is another benefit and power of the novel, because that's the mandate of a fiction writer, I think, is to capture these sensory details and make sure that they're accurate. And it's also the mandate of a filmmaker.
Your novels explore different issues, and with your latest book, Against the Loveless World, which won the 2020 Palestine Book Award and was a 2021 Aspen Words Literary Prize finalist. You did that. You explored various issues. And so how were you able to document a sex worker's life, or, also a resistance fighter's life?
So it's kind of a big open secret, especially in the Gulf region, that everybody knows this happens, and nobody wants to ever talk about it. I hesitated. This story has sort of been in me, and I don't really want to go into how I came upon this in the Gulf region, but I did see it firsthand, quite by accident, actually. And it was shocking to me, shocking because of the people who were there, respectable members of society, both men and women. So I always knew I was going to write about it, but I knew I wasn't mature enough as a writer to do it just yet. Because I think it's tricky, because, and only because, I write in English. If I wrote in Arabic, it wouldn't be. But because I write in English, my first audience are English readers. And that comes with Orientalist tropes, and I'm aware of that. And so the trick for me was how to write the story in a way that avoided these Orientalist landmines of, the rapey Arab men and the scary, abusive Arab men, right? Like all societies, we have our creeps and we have our predators. Men are, across the board, no matter what society, there's always this group of them that are like that. And we have ours. So that was the balancing act for me. But I have to say, it was the harder thing ended up being, the harder thing as a writer was to represent a political prisoner. Well, because that felt like a greater responsibility in a way. Political prisoners have such an exalted position in our society. And what they go through is, it's something that I will never truly understand. because I didn't live it. And there's an ethical responsibility when it comes to representation. So that was kind of why I decided to put her in this completely fictionalized room called the Cube. And that was completely out of imagination, because I was inadequate to represent her life in an actual prison. And I spoke with a lot of political prisoners in doing this research. I read everything about, and I spoke with Khalid Jarrar, whom I love and admire. I spoke with members of the Move family in Philadelphia who were freed after 40 years of being political prisoners. I know a lot about Mumia Abu Jamal, who is also a political prisoner here.
So you have a medical background. I mean, you used to write for medical science, and you've written articles, you've written poetry, you've written novels. How is it switching between these mediums? Is there overlap in your mind? Are they? Is it separate?
Yeah, there's no switch. I guess there's different methodologies, I guess, that I employ. I mentioned earlier that when I'm writing a novel, I don't really know what's going to happen. And so I just sit down with it and I get to know the characters and I write. And typically, the early drafts of what I write are complete garbage. Like I'd be embarrassed for anybody to see them. But it's part of the process. And that's how it works for me. I just, because I don't know what the story is, and I just start writing, and until the story comes out in one way or another, and it always changes, but I just need that initial sort of I like to call it a sculptor's lump of clay that I then sort of rework.
Did you always have that awareness when you began writing? Were you aware of that, or did you learn to be sort of dirhamihadik? I don't know how to say it in English. Like,
be kind
easy
to yourself.
on yourself. Yeah.
No, it's I even now, like if somebody, I think people who get an MFA and sort of study the craft and learn it from in an analytical way, they can speak more legibly about their craft. And I can't. Like, I don't really, I don't even, if you ask me, like to sort of tell you what part of a sentence, like in terms of grammar, I have no idea. I know what's right and what's wrong, right? but I can't dissect it for you or map it. I don't know what the devices I use are. I know what feels right. It's kind of, I guess, like somebody who learns to play music by listening and never learns to read it versus somebody who can read music and play it that way from reading instead of just hearing. So I think, that's the best analogy I can give. I have more, because I've done it a couple of times. I feel like now when I'm having self-doubt, I can reassure myself, like, no, it's going to get done. You've been through this before. You've had this crippling self-doubt before. You've been frozen before. It's okay. Like, so I have a little bit more confidence. The self-doubt is always there. I guess it's different with each one. When it comes to more scientific writing and clinical writing, I actually have an outline. I know what's going to happen. There's the methodology. There's the introduction, the results and the conclusion. It's all mapped out beforehand. And then I just sort of go in and fill it. It's very technical writing. And it's not even different kinds of writing, honestly. It's the difference between, doing 5 backflips versus picking your nose. I don't know.
Which one is which, though?
I don't know.
Which one is picking your nose?
I don't know.
I'm really curious now. Is it the medical writing that's backflips or picking your nose?
No, I have no idea where that came from, and why it came out. So I'm gonna have to sit with myself and decide what was the picking nose thing.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'd like to know. Actually, I'm so curious now. Okay. So another question is, how do you feel your writing has evolved? I don't know if you go back and read what you've written in the early days, but do you see an evolution?
I don't go back and read, but I feel like with Against the Loveless World that I felt like a better writer. It felt a little less effort intensive. Like I felt like what I wanted to say was coming out the way I wanted it to, as opposed to like I was really, really trying with Mornings and Janine, and I labored over every sentence. And I also think like with Mornings and Janine, and this actually might be a loss, going in my evolution. But even though I write in English, I feel in Arabic, and so the way I write tends to be more in the Arabic sort of verbose, flowery, elevated kind of language. What's in vogue now in English literature is simple writing, a lot of dialogue, scenes and whatnot. And my writing is the opposite of that. Like
Hmm.
because I don't really like that writing, and I believe that's the influence of Arabic, or at least I like to think it is.
Just going back to what you said earlier about Mornings and Janine being inspired by Ghassan Kanafani's Returning to Haifa. I'm sure you're aware it was adapted for the stage. Returning to Haifa was a play that written by Naomi Wallace and Ismail Khalidi. I actually watched the premiere at the Finborough Theatre in London in 2018. I don't know, did you manage to see it?
I didn't know. I did hear that Naomi and Khalidi were working together on that.
Do you see your novels being adapted for the stage or screen?
So, um, actually, because of the work that Naomi was doing, she was commissioned by someone who purchased the option to turn Mornings in Janine into a series. And she did. She wrote sort of an outline adaptation, which I went through and edited. But the rights were reverted back to me. So that was like the third time that it was optioned. So now, something always happens and it just doesn't get developed. Someone has purchased the option to adapt Against the Loveless World. So, we'll see. I don't really think about it. It would be nice. I would like to see it, especially in the right hands. But, things that I have no control over are not things that I just really put too much thought into. And ultimately, I just leave it to my agent and God and whoever moves the universe.
So, another thing that I'm not sure how much control you have over is when your work is translated to different languages. How has your work been received in different languages?
So there's a few foreign markets that have actually been my bread and butter. Mostly European markets because they actually have laws to protect writers and artists, unlike the United States and the UK and the Arab world and everywhere else. So Germany, Sweden, Norway, Italy. Interestingly, Germany was like the last European market to buy Mornings in Janine. And it was like every publisher that looked at it wanted it, but it was just like too quote unquote controversial or whatnot. They were all afraid. But the publisher who did end up buying it, it became a bestseller. And so they were quite happy with it. And it sold a lot in Germany. So, I mean, I've gotten letters from people all over the world, and some of the things that people have said and done have truly been humbling. There was this woman in Sweden who, after reading my book, started doing her own research and apparently decided to sell her house and move to Palestine and just be part of the Palestinian resistance, or just to,
Mm.
There's this apparently a book club that did a Mornings in Jenin tour in Palestine and Lebanon to go to all the places in the book. But the most impactful letters that I have received, some that actually made me cry, were from Palestinians, specifically Palestinian women. There were two families actually who wrote me very similar letters. One was a 48 family in 48, and one was in California. And they both said more or less, our entire family read this and it made us understand our parents or our grandparents or something, and it brought the family closer together. And so that was like, that was such a privilege to I mean,
Yeah.
to me, that's such a gift to me as a writer to feel like, these characters that I fell in love with and that came to life in these books are touching people's hearts in this way, especially Palestinian hearts. You always kind of, growing up, you think, sort of take for granted that all Palestinians know and all Arabs know what happened. And through the letters that I received, I came to realize that they don't actually know our history. And that to me was really eye-opening and orienting at the same time. Like, I feel like I even though I write in English, and the reason I write in English is not by choice. If I could, I would write in Arabic. But I write in English because that's the only language I have at my disposal. And even though I write in English, the people, my most important readership are young Palestinians and young Arabs. I
Mm.
don't think that we give them enough of our time and our labor and our talents because we take them for granted, and we assume that they know. We assume that they are on our side, or you know what I mean? That not that they're on our side,
Mm.
but that they get it, and they don't. And there's no reason to
Yeah.
think that they do or they should. Our conversation as Palestinians tends to be Europe. It's Anglo facing. You know,
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
we orient our conversation towards the people in power, and I think that's a mistake. I think our conversation should be oriented, number one, internally, and it should be oriented towards our friends in the global South and the global majority, in African nations, in South American nations, in Asian nations, the people who have, the people who are the global majority. Europeans have never been our friends. They have always looked at our lives with contempt. They have always treated us with contempt. And I think we should stop it. We should stop trying to convince them. We should stop trying to appeal to them. I actually don't care. They have all the power because we believe they have the power. That's where their power comes from. It's from our acquiescence and our belief in their power. But at the end of the day, all they have are guns and weapons. And even the money they have, they've stolen from us, the global majority. Their museums are populated with everything we created.
So this brings us to the idea of, taking control back over our narrative. Um, Voices like yours and other Palestinian writers who describe the land and the food, the culture, the historical events. You founded the Palestine Rights Festival in 2020. Tell us about why it all started.
When I wrote Mornings in Jenin, I was introduced to this whole universe of literature festivals. And it took me all over the world. And I just entered this world, and I realized that we don't have anything like that. And why don't we have something like that? Why isn't there something for Palestinians and Arabs? Because inevitably, all the festivals that I was invited to, I was the Palestinian writer. I was the token. I was the curiosity. I was the anthropological study. I was the person to ask about terrorism. Yeah, and I could write a book actually on the stupid questions that I have gotten, the stupid, racist, belittling, contemptuous questions that I have gotten at literature festivals. And then 2018, there's a group of activists who said, "Hey, we're doing a Palestinian literature festival. Would you like to take part?" And they were all white people, and they had a totally different vision. And I just asked them, I said, well, what makes you think you are qualified to put together a literature festival? I think it's a great idea, and it's a great initiative, but you're not the right people to do it. I can help, but it will be under this is something I've actually always wanted to do. And you just gave me the excuse to start doing it, but I won't do it this way, the way and they were very kind, and they were like, no, do it. Go ahead. So that's how that's how that happened. And I raised the money, and we had everything set to take place in New York, and it was going to be amazing. And then COVID happened and we had to cancel it. We got some refunds, but mostly we didn't. So I had to start again. But we found this amazing online platform, and it was something nobody had seen before. It was like it was 3-dimensional, these avatars. It was really special. And then a couple years later, we had the first in-person one, and now there's a congressional hearing going. There's a total actual congressional investigation taking place in the US Congress about Palestine rights.
Tell us about that.
So the festival took place on September the 22nd. And then the following weekend after that was October 7th. And before the festival, these Zionists were just freaking out. They wanted it canceled. They could not believe that there was going to be a literature festival at such a prestigious university as the University of Penn. But it didn't get canceled. They harassed us. They had these roaming billboards, these digital billboards with these awful photographs of, me, Salman Abu Sitta, Randa Abdel Fattah, some of our biggest intellectuals, most amazing people with these, demonic backgrounds and quotes taken out of context, and they called us Nazis, jihadis. But the festival itself was incredible. It was truly I'm not just saying this. I mean, I'm quoting people who were there who told us, that this was the most incredible event that they have ever been to regarding Palestine.
Wow.
And people still talk about it. Fadi Qattan just published a cookbook with the Norwegian publisher that was at the festival. This entire relationship happened at the festival. So it's having so many amazing reverberations, which is exactly what I hoped would happen. So, of course, Zionists freaked out. They cannot stand to see evidence of our brilliance, evidence of our scholarship, of our creativity. And so they went nuts. And the University of Pennsylvania was asked to turn over all correspondence and documents related to the Palestine Rights Festival. Some of the professors who were involved in the festival filed a lawsuit to prevent the university from doing that, but they lost. And so now there's all these documents, all the emails pertaining to Palestine rights. or handed over to this congressional hearing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so does this have implications about whether or not the festival will continue?
I mean, it won't happen at UPenn. I don't think they'll let us have it there again,
Okay.
but we're going to have it. I mean, we didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
We're celebrating culture. We're talking to each other. We're having intellectual exchange.
So seeing the amazing, effects of the festival, the relationships that were built, the celebration that happened, what more do you hope for it? What more do you envision for it?
I would love to see Palestine rights become an institution, a cultural institution. Right now, we're trying to do the festival every 2 years. Funding is always a challenge. And that's really the only challenge, really, that I feel that's difficult for me. But otherwise, there's a massive appetite for it. There's a massive appetite among artists and writers and consumers of culture alike. One of the things I was really keen to do at the past Palestine Rights was to bring writers from across generational boundaries, across linguistic boundaries, across geographic boundaries. I was keen to bring a lot of writers who write just in Arabic. The festival was bilingual and there was simultaneous interpretation. Because, I don't want people who write in Arabic to feel obliged to speak English to an English speaking audience when that's not the language they're comfortable in. So بحب أعزز العربي, in that way. I want to keep that element of the festival going because I think it's really important for Palestinians to meet on the singular landscape that unites us all. Like we are divided geographically, we have become divided linguistically, we've become divided economically, and politically. But the one place where we are absolutely whole is in our culture. We are whole in our dance. We are whole in our food, uh, in our longing, in our, and we are whole also in our greatest wound. Right? Everything we do begins in this collective wound that we all live in some way. I think
Yeah.
especially as creatives, so much of what we produce comes from this pain that we feel, that is a result of dismemberment of the society and dismemberment from our land and from the place that is the menba, the origin of our culture. Like it's when you really start to look at Palestinian culture, and this is true of Arab culture in every country. So much of our um, our heritage is actually born from the land. Like, for example, a lot of the tatriz patterns in our clothes are floral depictions of things that grow from the ground in a certain place,
Mm.
right? If you live in a coastal region, your tatriz was very different than the people who lived in the mountainous regions. All of our songs have to do with place, and our food has to do with what people were able to forage in different seasons. So the dislocation from the land and then the dismemberment from each other is something that we all live with, and that pains all of us, and we all deal with it in different ways. And institutions like Palestine Rights they become a landscape where we all get to be together across all of these boundaries, and it's really beautiful to witness.
That's so nice. So if one wanted to read, let's say, 5 Palestinian writers, past or present, Who would you recommend?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I love the works of Ibrahim Nasrallah. Malik Qanadil Jalil is and Zaman al-Khuyul Bayda are two of my favorite Arabic books about Palestine. Isabella Hamad is an up and coming writer that I think has a lot of talent. And of course, there's all the greats, Al-Qasim, Darwish, Tuqan, and also there's that, I haven't read it yet, but Dugga, Walid Dugga's book that was published. It was just translated in English recently that I'm looking forward to reading. A lot of the prison literature that's just now getting translated into English is, it's not literary necessarily, but it's really important. I also really like reading African writers, and probably my favorite writer of all time, my favorite book is 100 Years of Solitude. Yeah, you're smiling. It is such a stunning work of art, I think. And it's written very much kind of like, it reminds me of Arabic tradition of writing. It's this very verbose, flowery, elevated language that has very little dialogue, and it just paints a picture with unique assemblage of words.
That's amazing. Maybe that's why I enjoy Latin American literature so much. Maybe that's without knowing it.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you've been trying to work on your next novel. Are you allowed to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I'm happy to tell you about
secret?
it. No, I don't really believe in the top secret stuff. So it's about a Palestinian woman. She's an elder in her 80s in the Lebanon camps. She wakes up one day after an accident. We don't know what the accident is yet. And she's in the hospital, and she has no idea who all these people are around her, who are claiming to be her daughters and grandchildren who are doting on her. And the last thing she remembers was her expulsion from Palestine. And she's this 17-year-old trapped in an 80-something-year-old's body who just wants to go home. And she wants to get away from these strangers who are doting on her.
Oh, wow.
And so she and her donkey make it back to Palestine. And it's so part of it. So it goes back and forth in time. In the present day, it's all about her journey, how she crosses. And speaking of research, that has been like really difficult to map this, but it's happened and it's worked. And I still need to take a trip to Lebanon to fine tune it. And so there's the present day chapters of the journey, and then there is the Palestine before the Nakba and into the Nakba, into the expulsion chapters, where you get to know her. And eventually the chapters, the timelines meet up they intersect. And yeah, I'm really happy with the story, and I'm falling in love with the characters. And to me, that's always a sign when I start to feel anything, even if I don't like them. If I'm feeling something, that's when I start to feel optimism that I'm doing it the way I want it.
That's great. That's really good. And I think, I don't know if it provides any healing or just a bit of lightness in such a heavy time, but it's really nice that you're able to do that right now.
So all right, so you made me tell you about the story. Now give me a reaction. What do you think of it? So
I can't wait to read it.
Okay, good.
I can't wait to read it. Oh, come on, hurry up.
Good. All right. So you got a glimpse of the self-doubt and insecurity that always comes
Oh
with
my
it.
goodness. I mean, really honestly, like even when you were saying that your early drafts are rubbish or like a mold of clay, I wanted to say, I doubt it, but I didn't want to be rude. Um, so your novel, The Blue Between Sky and Water, was about 4 generations of powerful Palestinian women in Gaza. Do you think at any point you would revisit Gaza as in your novels?
So when I was in Gaza, one of the things that I did was to I held like 8 or 9 writing workshops with a group of young people, and helping them write their own stories about what happened to them. Because I feel strongly that this moment needs to be narrated by the people who lived it. And we have a collection of stories. Some of them are incredible. It's gonna get published in an anthology, I hope soon. We're gonna translate it in English. They're all written in Arabic. So that is going to come out of Gaza soon, maybe after this book. And I hope during the rebuilding of Gaza or something that maybe a story will come out of me. As of right now, honestly, I feel like as soon as this horror is over, and it has to be over, I mean, it will end, that I want to move there and just stay there and be part of the rebuilding and the healing and whatever. And maybe a story will come out of that. I don't know.
That's a really big, but it's incredible.
Not really. I mean, I am. I'm an old lady. My daughter's grown. She's married. She has a great life. It's just me and my dogs, and I want to, uh, there's so many people in Gaza that I love, and there's so much potential to give. I mean, something like this little school that we did for 120 students. I mean, it's transforming young lives, and I feel like anybody who can should go there, to give our people a break.
The people who were in your workshops, were they writers or people that are just interested in
Both.
the process? Okay.
Both. Most of them were young people who want to write, and some of them are budding writers. Some of them are semi-established writers in Gaza. They were all creatives in one way or another. Like initially, their reflex was to tell a story in a way that sounded more like a report. Like, okay, they bombed us, and then we went here, and then we did this and this, and so they're giving you a look at it, basically it's an audit of what happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, the task was to really probe them. So for example, this one woman who was pulled from the rubble, she wrote, our house was bombed. And I asked her, I said, when the house was bombed, did you know that's what it was? Like, what did you see? I know you didn't see the bomb, what did you see? And so when she started to explain, when I finally got her to explain in sensory detail, an entirely different picture emerged because she didn't hear anything. So apparently, and I learned this actually when I was there, when the bomb is coming your way, you don't hear it. People don't hear the bomb. So the word is, if you hear it, then you're safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
She said, I didn't hear it. I just saw a red light. And then I felt like this big heavy weight on my back. So that's, and they start telling you, and then I couldn't breathe. And I had them write that. I just had them write their sensory, like what they actually know, not what they realized later. And then the other thing I tried to get them to do was to tell me a small story. I didn't want a big story. I want a small story. And so, for example, we have now a story of the bread line, a guy talking to another guy while they're waiting to get bread in a long line. So I'm looking forward to this getting published because the stories are amazing, but also because I'm tired of people interpreting Palestinian lives and speaking for us and about us. And I'm older, and that's what I want to do. I want to empower another generation of writers who can own our stories.
And that's what you're doing. Suzanne, is there anything else that you'd like to say, that you'd like to advise, that you'd like to give aspiring writers, something that you're hoping for other than what you just said?
The thing I always tell young writers who want to write is this. The beautiful kind of writing rarely ever comes out the first time. And writing is not this magical process, where you just have all this talent and you write this beautiful and then only special people can do it. I don't see it that way at all. It's labor. It's real labor. It's hours and hours. So I think that's the number one thing to know, is that writing requires time, requires a lot of time. And the other thing is, it requires that you give yourself permission to not write beautifully. And this is something I always have to keep reminding myself when I'm writing crap and I know it's crap and I just want to walk away, and I just have to remind myself, no, it's okay. Just write crap. Just get this story out. It's okay. It's going to be crap. They're going to be stick figure characters. They're going to probably all sound like you in different ranting voices. That's okay. And that's how it is. I don't know which famous writer said this. Writers don't write, they rewrite. And it's really, really true. Like the story always comes out in the rewriting. So that's the advice I would give.
Who would you encourage to write at this time?
Everybody. Everybody should write. Everybody in Gaza, everybody in Palestine, everybody in every part of our diaspora should write, even if it's just, diary entries and family histories. Everybody should be writing, because every book, every memoir, every cultural contribution is part of the historic record of our presence in the world, our existence in history that has been and is being systematically erased. And I would say, most importantly, we need to document the stories of our elders. They have so much and they're taking it to the grave. I want these stories to be documented, whether orally or in writing. We need the artists. We need the writers. We need that layer of society to write the novels and to inspire reading. And so I would advise everybody to inspire your children to read, inspire them to write, inspire them to play musical instruments, to make art. Yeah, that's, food is the sustenance for the body, and art is the sustenance for everything else that is human.
That's beautiful.
So we can end it on that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Afaf. It was lovely talking to you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for listening to Tarwida, a podcast dedicated to bringing you the best of Palestinian arts and culture. For more information, please follow us on social media, and don't forget to subscribe. Salam.